At this juncture, I want to add a bit of contrast and color, and I also want to create a little bit of motion blur just to add to the overall surreal nature of this image. So first, let's go ahead and click on our adjustment layer icon and choose Curves. Next, let's take the blending mode to Soft Light. Now once we change the blending mode, we'll see some interesting contrast there. Here's our before and after. And this contrast is kind of interesting, but in my case I accidentally chose overlay. That's a bit too intense. Let me go back down to soft light. Now that's a little bit more restrained, a little bit better. There's our before and after. Next step, we're going to go into the different channels in order to modify the color. I'll start off in the red channel, and here I want to now edit the points. So I'll choose that option, and I'll add a bit of cyan by clicking and dragging down. Next I'll go to that blue-yellow channel and click and drag up, add a bit of blue there, and then I'll go to the green-magenta channel and just add a little bit of green. And so at this point I have this really interesting color aesthetic. I can continually modify this by going to these different channels and just changing the overall mix of this color till I get something that I like. Here we have that before and then after. Alright, so far so good. The next step I want to take is to add some blur. In order to do that, we need to merge all of these layers to the top. The best way to do that is by a shortcut. On a Mac, press Shift, Option, Command E. On Windows, Shift, Alt, Control E, and we'll go ahead and name this layer Blur. Now the type of blur that I want to add is a motion blur. So we'll go to Filter, we'll choose Blur, and then we'll select Motion Blur. Here in regards to the distance, we want a pretty low amount of blur. It doesn't need to be too far because we'll be painting this in. And in this case, I think somewhere right around there will be fine. Let's go ahead and click OK. Next step, we want to create a mask which limits all of the blur so that we can hand paint this in. In order to create that type of a mask, we hold down Option or Alt and we click on that Add Layer Mask icon. And it'll create a mask filled with black. Next step, let's grab our brush. Here we want to have a pretty big brush, no hardness there. We'll go ahead and lower the opacity, somewhere less than 100. I'm going to try 60%. I'm just going to start to paint in this blur. I'm going to paint it in on this side of the image so that it's almost like we're adding some motion to this, kind of creating a little bit more of a surreal effect. And I'll add it in a few other places. Let's lower the opacity, have a little bit more of a subtle effect as we move through some of the other areas of the image. And just blur things out a bit, add some softness in a few areas which might be kind of interesting. Just creating a little bit of a surreal aesthetic. Next, I'm going to crank this up and I want to add a bit more over here, just really bringing out some more of that blur in this area. Alright, well now that we have that, the next thing I'm interested in doing is limiting where the color is showing up in the image. So to limit color, one easy way to do that is to use hue saturation. Let's click on hue saturation and desaturate. Next we'll grab our brush again, and then we'll go ahead and paint with black. So we'll flip these two colors, and we'll paint with black at 100% opacity. And here, we're just going to start to bring in this color, and you can see how that's coming into the photograph as I paint through the image. And all that I want to do is kind of have this color connect or tie into this overall look. I'll press 4 on the keyboard, takes opacity to 40%, add a bit more here on the front edge, and just bring in a little bit more color here, just again so there's this really interesting color effect which is tying to our overall motion, kind of adding to the overall surreal nature of this image. And again, all that we're doing here is just having a bit of fun, having fun with this effect, having fun with color, just for the sake of creativity. Well, let's take a look at how we've done. Well, if we click through our layers, we can see our overall progress. Here's the original file. Here's a conversion to black and white. Then we have that solarization layer, which really makes things come to life in an interesting way. Next, a curves adjustment, where we added a little bit of color in order to create an interesting aesthetic. Then we have that blur layer, just adding some motion blur there on the back edge of the image. And then finally, this hue saturation adjustment layer, where we painted in this color. Alright, well the last thing I want to do is zoom out by pressing Command or Control minus. And then I'm going to grab my crop tool and click and drag over the image. I just want to change the overall crop here a little bit. I want to make this one a little bit more of a different shape. And so I'm just going to change this crop. I'm trying to line up this point with my top corner point there. And I want to make this just a little bit more dramatic perhaps, so that it's a bit more about the cyclist, bringing him up a little bit in the image so he's not falling back so far. Alright, I think that might look kind of interesting. I'll press Enter or Return to apply that. and then zoom in a little bit so we can evaluate. Again, yeah, he's moving forward towards the edge of the frame. And if ever you have someone near the edge like this with motion, it will give the sense that the movement is even faster. It's even more dramatic. It's reaching some type of an edge. All right, well, I think that's a wrap on this image. Here we have it, our overall before and then after.